Okay, everybody, welcome to another edition of The Hard Sell. On The Hard Sell, we recognize that selling is hard, so we're bringing leading revenue experts straight to you so you can maximize your own sales outcomes. And today we've got another great guest. Kris Wiig is a sales leader at almost a dozen startups at this point, including Stella Service, General Assembly, currently VP of Sales at FreeWill, but also has big company experience as well at the likes of Bloomberg, Moody's, and LinkedIn. So really quite a varied background, in all aspects of sales, all the way up through leadership. So, Kris, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Joel. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, we're just going to get right into it. But maybe before we do that, just so folks have context, do you want to maybe just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at FreeWill?
Sure. So we are a company that is building technology to help nonprofits raise money. And so specifically, there's an opportunity in America right now to raise trillions of dollars for nonprofits over the next 30 years. And that's because there's a giant wealth transfer happening from the baby boomer generation to younger generations. And what we're trying to help nonprofits do is tap into all the different types of assets that could be donated. And those assets typically require a lot of paperwork. So most people don't do it because it's expensive or time consuming. And so what TurboTax did for taxes, making it digital, easy, we are doing for estate planning, for stock giving, for IRA giving, for crypto giving, for other things called beneficiary designations and donor advised funds. We are currently the largest will maker in the country. And so we surpassed some other will makers in recent years. And we've also raised $6 billion in the last 4 years for great nonprofits. So I've had the privilege of building out a sales organization here that is a very purpose-driven team because we know we're helping nonprofits to expand the great work that they do.
That's exciting. And not to take too far of a tangent here, but I imagine in like one of the criticisms of fundraising for nonprofits generally is it can be like very expensive on a transaction basis. But I imagine if you're getting access to some of these bigger chunks of assets, like what it ends up costing for you to raise that money is probably on a percentage basis much lower than other alternatives, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so for example, when we make it available to a nonprofit to provide estate planning tools to their supporter base, the nonprofit is paying us a set annual subscription fee. We are not taking a portion of any of the estate gifts raised. And so and we do a sliding scale for nonprofits. So you might have an organization as big as American Heart Association or the Red Cross. They're going to pay a totally different subscription fee than the local animal shelter around the corner who raises $1 million a year.
That's interesting. Well, I love these double bottom line companies. And I imagine that it probably, adversity is such a part of sales. I imagine in this case, it's like you've got a little different type of reservoir to draw on than maybe in some of the other typical organizations.
Yeah, we are actually a social benefit corporation, and our largest investor is Bain Double Impact Fund, which is all about double bottom line impact. It actually allows us to tap into hiring talent that may have otherwise never considered using their skills in sales. For example, many of my sales team members are former nonprofit fundraisers who've never sold software, never thought they would go into the sales field, but now are loving the ability to expand their impact, not just at one nonprofit, but they're helping hundreds of nonprofits to fundraise now.
Yeah, that's a neat story. And I'm curious, maybe talk a little bit more about that. I think, for many people, when you're bringing, and you've trained a lot of different salespeople over, many different contexts, but there's a set of salespeople that might show up to you, or maybe from a competitor, or they have some experience. But I think for a lot of orgs, especially as you're starting to scale, you eventually run out of like the obvious candidates, and you do need to go tap into some sort of a different pool. So I'm curious about what is maybe a little bit about what the interview process looks like for that. So that someone's going to, maybe be a good fit if they're doing like a little bit of a shift. And then what is sort of the training regime look like to take someone that really understands the customer well, but may not understand this part of the selling process?
Okay, a couple of questions in there. So I'd say for FreeWill, the profile of what we're looking for is also relevant to where our product maturity is in meeting the market. When I first met the team about 3 years ago, not many nonprofits were open to the idea of online estate planning. It's a very status quo driven way that they used to achieve those same goals. And so we are, very disruptive, and we are very much so an unconsidered need, as opposed to selling a solution that folks are proactively going out to look for. So one of the things that we need to do in our sales role is a lot of education to the prospect about unconsidered needs. And so a sale around unconsidered needs is quite different. And so we are looking for people who are purpose-driven. We are looking for levels of high intelligence and intellectual agility, because based on the nonprofit size, sector, current ways of fundraising, we need to pivot our pitch. That is hard to teach, but it is teachable. And so there's a few elements here of really understanding the need and why it is a unconsidered need, and how to help them see that status quo is creating a lot of missed opportunities. And then the second part of selling is then the project management. And so I always say there's two parts of closing any deal. You got to get the prospect to believe, and then you got to get through procurement. Mm-hmm. So when we hire people who come from the nonprofit sector, they tend to be really good at creating the belief part. They help the other nonprofit folks to understand, oh yeah, the way I'm doing this today really isn't the best thing I could be doing. But then what I had to teach the nonprofit people to do was the project management of a sale. Because if you're used to fundraising, you're usually dealing with one other individual or perhaps their family office, and it's a much more emotional decision to donate. Whereas with a software sale, there's usually a multi-department buying committee. Yes, there's an emotional pull to it, but at the end of the day, you have to show value and how it's going to impact the overall bottom line of that nonprofit. And then you have to project manage that buying committee to make a decision. And so that to me was the hardest part. We use a couple of different checklists here. I use something I call the deal heat map, which if we can spend more time on if you think that would be helpful.
Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit more, because I'm curious about I think the getting through procurement is one of these, challenges that everybody faces, and and especially as you get into bigger and bigger, more complicated things, it tends to be that somebody shows up that is really just there to kind of give you a hard time or say no or delay. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit more about that, and how you've tried to get people to manage through that.
Sure. I usually will use dating analogies when I talk about selling, right? So the analogy I use is, when a seller first meets one prospect in that discovery call meeting, you both might get happy ears. The prospect might be super excited and say, oh yeah, we're definitely going to do this. And the seller now has the happy ears. That's like a couple going on the first date, falling in love and thinking we're going to get married. Well, very few people ever get married without having to meet the friends and family of their spouse. And very quickly you can find at that first encounter of meeting the whole family that perhaps grandma hates your guts, or their brother or sister hates your guts, right? There's always somebody in the ecosystem of decision makers or influencers that could derail the whole deal. And so before you even get to procurement, you've got to figure out who are the members of the buying committee, who are the influencers on the deal, who are the true decision makers, who are the budget holders. And before you get to the procurement person, whose literal job is to try to, either get the contract to be lower or to tear apart your contract in terms of legal language, you've got to have enough of a buying committee support so that the procurement teams feel like they have to make this deal happen, not try to derail it. So I actually will borrow from, not to be confused with Challenger Sale, the Challenger Customer, which is CEB's follow book. It really talks about the behavior of members of the buying committee. So they talk about mobilizers, talkers, and blockers, and they have about 7 different profiles. And we spend a lot of time trying to help a rep understand, are you actually, a rep will say, oh, my champion. Champion is such an overused term. Are they actually doing the actions to help you progress the deal? Are they telling you the information you need as the seller to get through procurement? If you don't have that person on your side, the deal's probably not going anywhere. So we spend a lot of time really analyzing, do we have the right people involved? What type of leverage or ability to push their organization forward do our points of contact have? Are we dealing with somebody who isn't that interested, so they're not going to tell their boss, they're not going to tell their peers? And then this is where concepts of multi-threading, also known as just reaching out to and having open lines of communication with multiple members of the buying committee becomes paramount before you just get to procurement.
And do you find I'm curious, since you've worked across a number of different contexts and industries, do you find like in your current situation with nonprofits, is it look and feel different when you get to that sort of that end stage, or is it mostly the same? It's just people have different titles, or?
I'd say the biggest differentiator here, and we actually do have partnerships now with for-profits. We've begun partnering. For example, we have a wonderful partnership with Nationwide Insurance. We are also expanding partnerships. Large corporate employers now want to provide FreeWill as a benefit to their employees to have access to estate planning tools, power of attorney, healthcare directives. And the difference I see with nonprofit organizations is the involvement of a board. So you could have sign off from the CFO, the executive director, the chief development officer, and then all of a sudden it goes in front of the nonprofit board, and one person on a 10-person board could be like, I want to spend more time on this. And it's like, oh, and that person just comes out of nowhere. And it's really hard to get nonprofit board time because they frequently, aren't all getting, I'm on the board of a couple different nonprofits. And if all of us show up to one meeting, that's it's like, wow, we all could make it because we're all, you're a busy person. Most of the people on nonprofit boards, they have a million other things that they're doing. So that to me is the biggest difference of the surprise derailing of the deal is the role that the board plays, and then the length of time it's going to take us to reach and educate those board members to turn them around to a yes.
Right, because it's not like they're showing up to work every day and you just got to work it. You got to fit into the schedulers, right? Like somehow you have to track down this person that has, this is, a couple hours a month or something.
And good luck getting everybody to show up to a board meeting in July and August, right?
Yeah, right.
It's always like, oh, the president of the board is out this month. We don't meet for another month. Deal delayed.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem. I've over the years, you in some cases you can manage these things as well as you can manage them, but sometimes you just seem to have hit against scheduling or whatever. Like it just can't get done. I've always sort of, I don't know what you feel about this, but I've always sort of told reps, it's like if you have a deal that's going to run through procurement, if you don't have a bunch of those deals ready at the same, like in parallel, like you're probably going to miss your number in a big way, one or more months, because you never know when these things are when you're really going to get them over the finish line.
Yeah. Yes. And unfortunately, most reps don't learn that lesson until they've lost. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to lose a deal. Right. And as you said earlier, there's only so much that we can control. Most reps don't even control all the things they can control. And even if you are excellent and diligent and disciplined at controlling all the things you can control, I've never met a salesperson who has 100% win rate. Right? I don't think I've ever met anybody who has a 60% win rate consistently, right? So the concept of being able to win and control a deal is I think has eluded the salesperson for centuries.
Yeah, 1,000 ways to lose a deal, only 50 ways to leave your lover.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So it's that the odds are not so good. Well, maybe let's talk a little bit more about kind of mindset and the salesperson. And what have you seen in from managing and coaching? Like what do you when you think about like the ideal sales mindset, or like what you sort of need to do to put yourself in position to be an elite salesperson? Like what comes to mind? How do you sort of think about that or talk to people about that?
Sure. There's somebody by the name of Carol Dweck who wrote a book called Mindset. I became familiar because I work with a group called Positive Coaching Alliance that started out of Stanford University. And so she talks a lot about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And really all that means is in a fixed mindset, you think your talent and ability has boundaries, has limitations. And you think that, oh, I'm no good at this and I'm never going to be able to get better at this. Whereas growth mindset is all about better. There's no best, because you will never reach an endpoint. There is always more work to be done. And it's really about mastery. And I 100% believe that sales is a craft to be mastered, but in that mastery, there's always something new to work on. There is absolutely no point in time where a person knows every possible thing and does it perfectly well when it comes to selling. There's just too many elements. for us to be able to improve upon.
Yeah, and I think anybody that didn't believe that over the last 2 to 3 years, I think probably got a very rude awakening that things can change very quickly. And if you don't know, if you can't learn and adapt, you're probably in trouble.
Yeah, and so I will kind of, test for this in an interview simply by asking a person to walk me through something that they've mastered in their life. In decades past, a lot of organizations like to hire former athletes. I'm a former Division I basketball player. I played D1 ball at Brown University. I've been a basketball coach, volunteer for kids 5 to ages 18 for the last 23 years. The fact that you played sports does not matter. It is the fact that you busted your butt and put in the effort to master something. And so I will hire former musicians, mathematicians. I've hired carpenters, masons, power lifters, chess masters. As long as you've gone through the pain of kicking your own ass to get better, and you're choosing to do it, and this is a big distinction. Children are made to do things by their parents, by their teachers, by their coaches. The people who are most successful, it's because they fell in love with the thing and they truly find a joy in the work and in the art of doing it and in the effort. And so when you find people who are choosing to put themselves through the challenge of getting better, I want you on my team.
Yeah, that's a good way to that is a good way to put it. And I think I suppose if you could figure out how to really identify that well, I mean, it probably massively increases the aperture of the people you can sort of bring into your hiring funnel versus saying, well, like, oh, I'm only hiring people that have like BDR experience at this company or, gone through whatever, top, target account selling or something.
Yeah, and then it also, once I know what a person has focused on before, and again, one of my favorite former colleagues is a gentleman who was a mason, and the skill set to be able to create a plumb wall, meaning like you're stacking bricks and putting cement, and it's got to be straight and lined up. If it's not perfect, it's wrong, right? And so there's a level of mastery there that as we were working together to coach him on sales, I was able to always tap back into the mindset that he had when he was getting better as a mason and remind him of growth mindset. Because when you're failing, it sucks. And we get really disgruntled, we get really down on ourselves. And that's where a coach can come in and just help you with your mindset to say, hey, you might be making a mistake right now, but this is fixable. There's things that are within your control that we can do here. And so when I have a frame of reference of something else that they've done, to point out to them, remember when you couldn't do this other thing? And then look how far you got and look how much better you got. And then they go back to believing in their ability to do that. And the belief in themselves is the biggest differentiator I see.
Yeah, there's some research that was done. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I think it was Jeremy Siegel was the author about sort of like positive mental attitude. And they'd done this big survey of, I think it was insurance salespeople across all these different, sort of characteristics and psychometrics. It was positive mental attitude that they found was like very strong. And I think it probably relates very closely to what you're talking about, which is, that ability to not, get down but sort of think about, well, I'm getting better. Like every time somebody says no, I'm closer to like, that's some of those ideas. Yeah.
On the team here, we talk a lot about emotional tanks. And again, this is a concept I borrowed from my work with Positive Coaching Alliance and working to coach coaches on how to coach little kids. Mm-hmm. Every single one of us has an emotional tank, just like a gas tank or just like your cell phone battery. If that tank is low, your ability to succeed is going to also diminish pretty quickly. And so sometimes, we do a Monday sales organization wide meeting where on Zoom, I want everybody to have their camera on because I just need to look them in the face and see that if there's a grimace or a smile. And sometimes I'll just do a quick poll of, on a scale of 1 to 10, show me where your tank is. And they're honest. And if someone is below a 7, the team knows that we got to rally to go make sure that that person's okay. And if somebody is a 9 or a 10, they know that they're going to be part of spreading the sunshine to one of their teammates. Because we got to get everybody just feeling good, especially in sales. You are the instrument. I used to have this one SDR that at a couple of companies ago that was like going through a really tough breakup and just was at like a really pivotal part in his life where he was like hated showing up to work, and he would get on the phone to make a cold call. And if, sometimes a prospect is rude or just hangs up on you, and he would sometimes just be like slamming the phone down. And I'd be like, let's go for a walk. I'm going to buy you an ice cream. I'm going to give you a hug and we're going to get your emotional tank back to a state where you can actually communicate well with people. And sometimes you just got to say, you know what? I don't have it in me today. And that's a huge part of resilience. Resilience is not pushing through. Resilience is knowing when you need to rest and how to recuperate so that you can come back with at least 90 to 100% of what you can do again. If some people think that resilience is forcing yourself through something when you know you are operating at 30%. That is useless to yourself, to your team, and to your customer. I'm a big fan of redefining what resilience means. It doesn't mean powering through unhealthy or toxic scenarios. It is sometimes taking the courage to step back, slow down, and perhaps even rest so that you can come back stronger and more well-informed.
Yeah, I like that framing of it. And what you talked about earlier about, kind of the team, sort of also being aware and kind of helping each other out. And this is interesting. And I'm curious, I think in sales orgs of past, a lot of that happened kind of naturally on the sales floor, but now as a lot of us are distributed still, that's maybe a little bit harder to recreate some of that. But I'm curious, it sounds like you've got some things that you've done over, like what have you seen be successful? And do you think you can create that, if you're very intentional in a remote environment, or do you think people really do need to be all together?
I do think that there's a huge power in getting people physically together. So I do think that that's like the ultimate way to, I think of like just electricity passing. It's so much easier to conduct that electricity around each other. But I also have tried to find, and I'm enjoying the challenge right now of managing a 70-person sales organization where we are all over the country and 95% of our interactions are online over Zoom. We started doing different things as a company. It can't just be just the sales organization. So we do company-wide meetings. We do fun, just like breakouts. We try to mimic what the water cooler conversations would have been in the office. We did a company-wide retreat where we flew everybody together. And instead of it being, 3 days of just business, we did things like build boats out of cardboard and try to sail them and race them across the lake. We played lots of games. We did a lot of work and brainstorming. So we do try to create that connective tissue of the humanness that I think can easily be thrown to the wayside when, I know there are days when I'm in back-to-back Zoom meetings and we barely even stop to say, how are you today? How's your week going, right? But I'm also fortunate enough that is really rare. So we are very people first, and that's an easy word to say, but we truly, truly bake in our values into so many communications. For example, in the sales world, days of yore, it was like, let's take the team out for drinks. Happy hour over Zoom, you're just sitting in your house by yourself drinking, right? Like, yeah. Okay. So, especially during COVID, we did things like, let's do a foam roll. We brought in an outside trainer and we did foam rolling, yoga, and breathing sessions just to teach people how to, again, connect with the instrument that they're going to use all day and keep themselves in a healthy mindset. We started doing things across the company that we call coffee talk, where every other week we do a session in the morning. It's now led by any employee can register to lead a coffee talk, and it's on a topic of their choice. But you get to be exposed to, I'll usually do stuff on things like positive psychology or things that might be more sales bent. But one of our co-CEOs did one on climate change. There could be another one on cooking. But it's just ways for us to gather as humans outside of work. And we have some awesome people that work at FreeWill, so those end up being really fun conversations.
Yeah, that's neat. Those are some really good suggestions, and hope people are writing some of these down, because I know this comes up in conversation all the time about like, how do I recreate, what used to be the sales energy in this distributed environment? So some really good ones. Well, we could talk all day about this stuff, I'm sure, but we're starting to run out of time here. But really appreciate you coming on the show. And if people want to be in touch with you or learn more about FreeWill, like what are the best ways to do that?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me, but definitely put in an actual note that says, hey, I heard you on Joel's podcast, or give me some frame of reference. Because I am a VP of sales, as you might imagine, I get hit up by vendors, cold calls, and SDR outreach all day long. So unless I understand why you're trying to reach out to me, I'm probably not going to be able to get back to you. So I would hesitate to give out my FreeWill email address, but LinkedIn is my preferred form of meeting new people.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just look up Kris Wiig, 2 eyes, right?
2 eyes like in face.
Yeah.
Just
And I think that's probably good. That's probably just good advice for LinkedIn in general, like random outreach for I don't know, LinkedIn, the in-mail is just a dumpster fire. So yeah, you better be crisp and you better be on point.
yeah.
So great. Well, thanks again for being on the show, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Joel.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Hard Sell. I'm your host, Joel Stevenson. And this week, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have a repeat guest, and something interesting happened on the way to the forum where Kris Wiig, who was our guest in the last episode, actually took a different role within her company before we published the podcast. And so we thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about that transition and how that role is sort of shaping up. And so if you want the full bio, just listen to the last episode if you haven't done that already. And with that, Kris, welcome back to The Hard Sell.
Thanks, Joel. Good to be back.
Well, maybe give us just a sort of an update on what's happened since the last episode, what you're going to be working on now, and then it'd be interesting to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So I'm at a company called FreeWill, and as we mentioned in the last episode, I've spent the last 3 years building out their B2B sales team, specifically selling to the nonprofit community. And we went from 6 salespeople to 70 in about 3 years during the pandemic. And now we, as a company, want to pursue partnering with for-profits. And we provide estate planning, power of attorney, healthcare directives, and we do this all digitally. And so we think that there's a major opportunity to help every American have access to great estate planning. And we want to do that now by partnering with life insurance companies, financial advisors, and we're also providing this as an employee benefit. And so completely different market, completely different end buyer, but I am going to be helping to bring to market a very similar solution to what my team have been selling for the last 3 years. What's going to be super different about this, as opposed to me managing a team of sales reps, I am now effectively becoming an individual contributor once again, and really working to figure out, what's the messaging, who's our ideal customer profile, what's the pitch to get us in the door, what's the sales cycle and that sales journey actually going to be, and then turn around and build out a team again.
It's interesting because from the point at which you were, now you're kind of back into what we sometimes refer to as like the whiteboard selling,
Yeah.
where you've got to try to figure out what are the messages that resonate and how you can sort of explain it to a new set of customers that you haven't sold to before. And so I'm curious, like some might say, well, it sounds kind of risky. Like, why would you do that? You had something that was sort of going well and you were growing and scaling a team. Like, why go back to sort of carrying a bag and trying to figure some new thing out, on the path to sort of building it up again?
Simple answer is I love it. If you look at the history of my career, I normally don't stay at an organization for more than 18 to 24 months. I really enjoy this building phase. I really enjoy this figuring out phase. I've worked with a lot of different startups, and I am almost always brought in as one of the first sellers, if not coming in and managing a super tiny team that's still figuring it out. So I genuinely love what I consider to be a craft of selling. And I've worked in 17 different industries at this point. And to me, it's the mental gymnastics that I get to do when figuring out what's the offering, what's the motive for buyers, having those conversations. It's actually a lot of research, meaning like, I feel like I spend the majority of my time right now really trying to understand all the different ways that our offering makes sense in the world of potential buyers. And I call it, connecting the dots. So I'm going out there right now researching all the different seemingly disparate dots that are around the concept of estate planning, end of life planning, and trying to pull together now all the different threads that make it make sense for insurance companies, make it make sense for wealth advisors, make it make sense for employee benefits providers. And that to me is the fun part, is I get to learn new things, consider new perspectives. And the most fun is then pulling all those dots and threads together and helping that new potential buyer see something that they had not seen before. And, those are sometimes referred to as unconsidered needs. But that to me is the most fun part about bringing a new offering to market. So yeah, a little bit risky, but I've been at FreeWill for 3 years now, which is the longest I've ever stayed at one company. Which it doesn't feel risky to me.
Yeah, you've done this before, just in different contexts. I'm curious about that. I want to get maybe more into the specifics of the job in a moment, but for you do sometimes see this pattern in startups, not only with sales leaders, but with other finance leaders and other sort of functional growth marketers, that sort of thing. And I'm curious, like, how do you know when it's time to move on? Because this is a little bit of a different, I mean, it's a sort of a more modern approach to career management, but it's not like your objective is to go with one company and stay with it forever until they're a massive public company. You're sort of trying to find, the next place that you're going to add value in a particular part of the startup cycle. And so how do you, kind of time the entry and the exit of that? I'm curious.
Candidly, when you're in a sales leadership role, you're in a performance role, right? And so, it's looking at, for me, just my own level of excitement and joy in the work. And sometimes the joy starts to lessen for a wide variety of reasons that have nothing to do with the performance. Things could be going well, but for anybody who's ever worked at a company, it's never just yourself, right? There's groups of people all trying to accomplish different things. And there's all different departments, and there's all different ways in which those teams and groups can work together. And if I start to get a sense that the culture or the team, not necessarily my sales team, but like the executive team and the group team is at either a point where the value I'm providing is not necessarily maxed out, but kind of diminishing returns, or I see that the company is maybe not going to be growing at the rate, and they're content with where they're at, or maybe they're getting ready for some sort of exit.
Mm.
I then know it's time for me to go. And sometimes I just see something new and exciting that maybe it's a shiny object syndrome, but usually it's a combination of all those things where if I'm not truly in it, I only sell products I believe in. I only will build teams and coach salespeople to sell products that we all feel good about. And so sometimes I meet a new organization that I'm that more deeply passionate about, or there's something that resonates a bit stronger than what I was currently doing. Once or twice in my career, I candidly took a new job for the money, and I will never do it again. Yes, it's important to be able to, have the financial means that you require for your life. But shiny objects to me are not just money fueled. It's really about how passionate I am about the concepts. And so FreeWill, for example, estate planning doesn't get everybody, jumping out of bed, but I have a personal story of when I was 23, my dad died at 55 of a heart attack, kind of out of the blue, and he died without a will. I was in an estate, legal issue for over a year, totally distracted me. And now in my 40s, I've got my mom who's elderly and is starting to show signs of, needing some additional care. So I'm, trust, power of attorney, healthcare directives. These are all things that I am genuinely personally passionate about, and I believe every American should have access to. So it's real easy for me to jump out of bed and go share this story with others.
Yeah, it's not a problem until it's a problem,
Right.
type of thing. Yeah, I've seen a number of these situations myself, and I think especially for, this is sort of a non sequitur, but especially for younger people, it's something of sort of a morbid topic, and so there's a lot of resistance to, even though you have to do it. It's like you really don't want to do it because you have to sort of confront your own mortality at some level, and it's like it could take a bit of sort of bravery to get through that, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually part of why I'm so drawn to this work. And I think over the next few years, we're going to see that the technology ecosystem around end of life planning is going to be significant. I'm already seeing being in this space. There's 76 million baby boomers in America. It's the largest population we have in America. And these are all folks that are in their, ends of life phase. And there's many more of them than there are of, the Gen Xers, millennials, and even younger. And so it's going to be falling on these younger generations to start thinking about how are they going to take care of their parents or grandparents. In decades ago, you lived with your family. Grandma and grandpa might have lived in the house with you. We now see families have, working, both spouses might be working. Kids are usually taken care of at a daycare. So there's not really the same type of societal functions to take care of older folks. And I think that there's a massive opportunity for technology and companies to come in and help figure this out. And there's a massive appetite for younger generations to have some sort of help. I know we're going off on a tangent here, but this is, if you want to talk about how do I choose my next move, I used to joke around that I've always worked for the Friendsters. I've never had the opportunity to work for, the Facebooks. And what I mean by that is I've been super lucky in life that as new trends are emerging, I've been able to join the companies that were at the beginning of those trends, meaning like Friendster has been around before MySpace or, Instagram or TikTok and all these things. But that idea was at its, nascency. And so I feel like I'm at a company yet again, and I've done this in 17 different industries where I know that, as you said earlier, so many people are hesitant to talk about and reflect on end of life planning. But I think that this is going to be something that over the next 5 to 20 years, it's going to be more normalized, and it's going to be seen as life leads to death. And we should not be afraid of it. And there's many more people now realizing this. Are you familiar with what a doula is? There's a birthing doula. Yep. There's a concept called death doula. And I have several friends that have actually become death doulas. And I realize, again, morbid topic here, but the point around this and why it's relevant maybe to this interview is that, yet again, this is a trend that's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think the wave is just starting, where we're waking up to the fact that this is something we have to face. COVID made that really, really evident. And people are now finding ways to think about this, have conversations within their family units to really start thinking about this. So again, like I'm super fortunate that I get to jump in on these trends. And that's why I love working at startups, and I change roles when I think that there's a new trend coming that I want to be a part of.
Yeah, the concept makes sense to me in the sense that, if you can reduce friction for somebody to start this process, so much of it, I think, there's a lot of upfront friction. You got to find an estate attorney, perhaps, or you've got to find a resource to create a living will. There's a bunch of, there's complicated terms you're not familiar with. And I think, the ability to have, your sort of trusted company resources help you with this and say, oh yeah, like we're going to help you down this road, might be enough to just get some people to actually start and do that. So the probate dockets do not need more work, I don't think.
Right. And there, I know this isn't supposed to be an infomercial for FreeWill, but when I started looking into the importance of estate planning, it started pointing out, that this is a DE&I, this is a financial inclusion. This is, there's all sorts of different reasons why people are not going out and looking at estate planning or power of attorney. One is it's really expensive.
Yep.
Right. So the other is, if you are part of any sort of non-traditional family, you need a will to make sure that the things that you want carried out for yourself in your own passing are adhered to. Or if you have children, that you're taking care of, you want to make sure that those kids are then under the guardianship of somebody that shares your beliefs. Within, generational wealth. Research shows that over 80% of Black and brown folks do not have an estate plan. And one of the main ways that you pass on generational wealth is through your estate plan. So when we, there's a story made pretty well known recently about property ownership within a Black family that had been lost. The property had been lost for years, decades, and just recently it was reinstated to them. So there's a lot of issues that I've been uncovering, and we've been uncovering at FreeWill, around how estate planning fits in at the intersection of all these different societal issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. Certainly, folks that have done a good job of this, going back to continental Europe and into America, have a definite leg up from people that started with nothing and don't have the resources and sort of the financial backgrounds to figure some of this stuff out. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, maybe like getting back to
Yeah.
trying to figure this out at the corporate level, from having done this a few times, like what are let's say I'm a CEO and I'm hiring my first sales resource to really help me figure out a market and start to find some things that are going to work. Like, can you predict how long something like that is going to take to figure out, or do you have a sense of it
Yeah.
going in? Or
So there's a few different elements to that, right? So there's Harvard Business Review put out an article at this point, probably over 10 years ago, called the sales learning curve. And they talk about three different types of reps: Renaissance reps, enlightened reps, and coin operated reps. What we're discussing right now is the work of a Renaissance rep, right? And so elements, just broader strokes here is you got to understand what's the offering and where is the value in that, right? Like, what is going to actually be the thing that we help either a person or a business to do? And so first is, like, sometimes founders or the people who make a product or offering, they think they've got value, but we have to really first solidify, is this valuable? So there's a lot of conversations with prospective customers, right? That just trying to get somebody to give you their time to give you feedback. This used to be what I was excellent at doing. For example, early in my career, I had the ability to get into and meet with a lot of hedge funds. And this is, I learned the art of do not waste their time. If they give me 5 minutes, I got to know what I'm talking about in 5 minutes. So I'd say phase one is make sure you've got something that your end buyer is willing to give you some time to talk about, and you first confirm that you're solving a real problem. Now, the second part, so that's really getting people to believe that they need this. The second part, which is the harder part to gauge in answering your question, is what's going to be the procurement and buying process. So you might have a product or offering that truly solves a problem that people want to fix, but depending upon their business and the process of how they engage with vendors, it could be a 3-week sales cycle, a 3-day sales cycle, or a 30-month sales cycle. So I'd say, with the offering that we're working with right now, we are selling into very large financial institutions, very large, employers, and this is likely to be at a minimum 4 to 6 months, and more likely something like 12 to 18 months. And that just honestly comes with experience. You have to have somebody on your team, or at least somebody on your board or somebody in your ecosystem, to bring you to reality of what's the typical sales cycle like, right? Like, getting a contract signed by a Fortune 500 company usually involves a lot of procurement steps that they I always say sales, there's 2 parts to sales: get the buyers to believe, get through procurement.
mm-hmm.
And so if both take a long time, you got yourself a really long sales cycle. So it's different industries. Selling to hedge funds, for example, you could get a deal closed usually way faster than trying to sell to a large investment bank or a large, whereas selling to another startup might take only a couple of weeks or months. But again, selling to a Fortune 100, 500, or 1000, there's many people, many different parts of the procurement, and that can take a really long time. So that's I'd say, like, that comes down to, you need to talk to somebody who's experienced selling into different types of businesses.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept where there's, I think, if maybe to think about it a slightly different way, that in general, the bigger the company you're selling to, the longer it's going to take you to get a signal back about if you've really got something. or maybe like the more people in the buying committee, the longer it's going to take you to like really figure out, what someone's going to be willing to pay for your solution, perhaps.
Yeah, I'd say the what you hit the nail on the head with there is the buying committee aspect. So if at a giant company your end buyer is one very senior person, you might be able to get in the door fairly quickly. But if your end buyer ends up being cross-functional, cross-departmental, and you've got to herd a bunch of different cats to get them to also believe, see value, and then get a sign off, you're talking months and months and months, which sometimes a startup doesn't have that runway.
Yeah.
And that I think is, a huge part of this is at FreeWill, we're a well-established business. We have, consistent revenue coming in the door for one business market. So part of what allowed me to make the personal decision to completely switch gears and take on a, supposedly risky role of selling an unproven, offering is that I know that this company will still survive if this idea doesn't.
Right. Right. Yeah. And maybe to kind of pull on that a little bit. So, as part of this Renaissance rep, as you've described it, I imagine quite an important part of that is also communicating what you're learning to the company, and then potentially the company has to change based on what you're hearing and learning. And so I'm curious a little bit, like, how does that process work, and how do you, sort of effectively communicate to whether it's like the product team or CEO or, whoever sort of needs information about the feedback that you're getting directly?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And this is where I think my favorite thing about being in this role is instead of me trying to push an idea, I'm really trying to facilitate a conversation where the end user feels comfortable enough to share with me what's actually happening. Like I've sat in, not just here at FreeWill, but I've sat in, potential customer interviews with our engineering team, the, CEO and founder, and they're pushing an idea, and I'm watching the prospect's face. They're saying, yeah, sure, that's helpful, but I'm watching them not, and it's like, let's stop here. Is this actually helpful? What about it is helpful? And so really bringing the customer in to share their perspective and getting your, other teams, so whether it be the engineering team, the product team, they've got to hear it from them. So I try to facilitate conversations where we're getting the customer to actually talk about what their true response and reaction is, and create a dialogue then where we can figure out, okay, how do we do this differently, better? Is this something that we just want to totally scrap? That to me is the most fun part of this, is facilitating those types of conversations.
Yeah, it sounds like as you were describing earlier, that's almost the first part of your selling process, is just to get somebody to the place where they're willing to actually be upfront with you about what their pain points are. Like
Right.
maybe perhaps even before you have a full solution. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. And again, like those, for example, I was at a conference maybe 2 months ago, and there were a lot of different folks there, and networking, sharing what I was doing. I was there more of like just personal, professional networking. It was not a industry specific event. And in that conversation, I had the opportunity to just share what FreeWill is up to and throw a couple ideas out, and some people naturally glommed onto it. And then through dialogue with them, I started to see how they were processing our offering, and they would ask more questions. And then that's my starting point. And I've said this, and I don't think we talked about this in our last interview, but your first sales pitch when you're bringing a new product to market is going to be your worst, because you genuinely have no idea and you're just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall. When you have an intelligent person on the other side who truly understands their business problems, their responses are what is going to inform your next move as the seller. And so it's really an opportunity for a salesperson to not jam their product and offering down their throat, but to see from a genuine, what is this prospective buyer? What do they really think of it? Let them tell me that this baby's ugly. Let them tell me, how they would go about doing this. And then I go to the next conversation with a new prospective buyer, and I take with me what I learned from the next one. So then my second conversation is a little bit better. And then I learn their perspective. And by the way, in between those two conversations, I have Googled and researched a boatload of stuff. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's the thing that a lot of folks miss, is that they're not listening enough, and they're not looking to get the other person to speak enough, and then they're not doing their homework and going a little bit deeper. So I might have an hour-long call with a first prospective buyer. I might then spend 24 hours, you know, researching everything we talked about and really thinking and contemplating, and then creating more dots, right? So this is all about, I keep throwing more dots on the whiteboard, and I keep connecting more of those dots, so that in the next conversation, I have more to offer. And when I have more to offer, they have more to respond to.
Right.
And then it just keeps rolling until finally you wake up one day and you're like, now we have a nice clean pitch that works. And we know, the top 5 things to say to these exact job titles. But that's the creative process. That's actually the most fun part to me, is the creation process.
Yeah, it sounds similar to something I see with startup CEOs, which I don't know. I find it is maybe a little bit of a little bit cynical, but it's sort of this idea that you sort of start pitching with the VCs that you don't really necessarily want to raise money from, so that they can point out the obvious problems, and then take it to the better VCs. But I wonder, in the selling process, is that the way you necessarily think about it? Or do you just take, like, if you can have a good conversation, you just take the good conversation, and then hopefully you learn enough to then go back to the person, versus saying, like, I know this person's going to say no, and I'll probably burn a bridge here, but it's worth it to try to get to the next one.
Well, again, this is where the craft of salesmanship, right, is not always they have to buy the product at the end of it.
Mhm.
Right. So I want to talk to the smartest, biggest companies as quickly as I can, but that doesn't mean I'm going to put it in my pipeline forecast and think that I'm going to sell them. I'm
Yeah,
going to learn from them. They're going to tell me why this isn't going to work for them right now, but they're also going to tell me what are the nuggets that they're excited about. And then I'm going to build upon those, and then I'm going to try to get in the door with maybe some smaller organizations, so I can actually just get some deals in the door. But the whole time I've got those big company conversations still in the back of my brain, and I am working towards being able to come back to them with all the resources I know I'm going to need to get through their procurement process.
right.
Right? Because if I talk to a Fortune 500 company, the response is going to be, this sounds interesting. Send me your one pager. Send me your proposal. I don't have that yet.
Mhm.
I've got a couple of disparate ideas, right? So I always like to have the hardest conversations where I know they're not going to be my first buyer as quickly as possible, so that I can learn what's my North Star of where I need to go over the next 6 to 18 months to be able to can then consistently get those types of buyers. And this can actually sometimes be a problem for a lot of startups. This is talked about a lot. It's, the founder sale syndrome, where founder or CEO of a very early stage company might be able to, through friend or network, get in the door at 1 or 2 big companies, and then they think they've solved the problem. But the reality is that is not yet at all a repeatable and scalable process.
Yeah.
So that's usually where I end up, those are the types of companies I end up working at, where it's like, okay, you proved out that there's something here that a big company could use, but you found the one person who, you went to business school with, or you found an easier in, and that's not a sales process.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had 2 previous guests. One, Matt Blumberg, who's CEO of Bolster, who talked about this concept of whiteboard to PowerPoint to Adobe selling over the sort of the course of
There you go.
startup life. And then Matthew Bellows, who was the original Yesware founder, and who just recently sold his new company to American Express. He talked a lot about this, like getting the first 1 or 2 sales is something that he spent a lot of time thinking about. But you're right, like eventually then you have to hand it off to somebody else that's going to go figure out, like, how does this not become like a completely one-off bespoke
Right.
process every time.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes big companies have very different problems and challenges than the middle of the market, right? And then the smaller part of the market. So you've also got to go in eyes wide open. That I don't know. There's a Simpsons episode where Homer. This is 20 years ago. Homer Simpson somehow gets to be the person who just tells the car company the car that is the everyman car, and it's just a total disaster, as you might imagine, because it's all the things that he thinks he wants and needs, but it is not at all baked in reality. So I think sometimes you can get really pulled down the rabbit hole with a customer that just has their specific wants and needs. One of my favorite examples of this is, I won't name the company, but we had a really big organization that was this is not a FreeWill, another company that was very interested in their product, but they said, up the reporting and the data. Everyone always wants to say, do you have APIs? Do you have integration? And it's like, instead of saying, yes or no, ask them why they need it. What is it that you're trying to do? And this one individual on the buyer side was explaining this huge, big sounding, seemingly complex problem. So I brought in our VP of engineering for a meeting, and we asked this individual to walk us through their workflow. And as they started to walk us through the workflow, my VP of engineering said, can I show you something? And literally on the person's Excel sheet, just showed them how to use the filter button. Solved all the problem. We did not have to build an integration. We did not have to build an API. And it was like, wow, this is a very senior individual who was experiencing a real business problem, but it was solved with a super simple solution that they could control themselves. And that to me is like, sometimes people go out and build product for phantom problems.
Yeah. Yeah, we're certainly, we sometimes we fall in love with the solution and not the problem. It's certainly, we certainly see that a lot in startup land, where you get a lot of creative, capable, engineering type folks that really love the DeLorean, or whatever it is. So
yeah.
Well, I think that's probably a great place to end it. So thanks for being our first return guest on the hard sell. And I think you gave the best way to reach you last time. So maybe is something a little bit different to end this time. If someone has done zero estate planning and they should just do the basics, it's what, durable power of attorney, living will. Are there any others that?
Something called beneficiary designation, where if you have something like 401ks, IRAs, pensions, those are not covered in wills or trusts, and they have to be specifically named. And so, we have wills, trusts, power of attorney, advanced healthcare directives, beneficiary designation, and if they just go to freewill.com, they can find free tools for all of those, and no strings attached. It's completely free.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely highly recommend. If you don't have those things, you may not think you need them, but you don't need them until you need them. And so better to do it now when you have your health and you have your wits about you. So Kris, thanks again for joining, and hopefully talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Joel.
Thanks.